Hi, I'm Sam,
And I'm Andrew.
and this is Teens Talk Politics. On today's episode, we will be discussing COVID-19, which is a very influential and big subject right now. Um, we are going to show our opinion as teenagers on the SARS COVID-19 outbreak. Um, and so, yeah. So, our first bullet point is the Trump administration's response to the outbreak early 2020. And the Trump administration at the time went under some extreme criticism for their failure to um, act to protect the United States. And this is a very controversial subject for what the Trump administration should have done. I think
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. There was kind of very much two sides to this scenario. One was we didn't know how big of a deal this was, and so I see why the Trump administration could have gotten confused. Like this could have been a small cold, or it could have been the next Black Plague. We didn't know, but so you could I so when you're in the future, we could be biased looking back on this. So I'd like to keep that in mind because the Trump administration looked like it tried to favor more of the economy because I think the Trump administration from the data they were getting or from what the president thought was that this was a smaller deal from the president's statements. Like as he said, it's just like a flu. It will go away. By Easter, it'll be a miracle. And so I think, do you think that the Trump administration was ignorant, or what do you think's happening?
Well, I think with the Trump administration's response to COVID-19, I think it was not what we needed. We needed more leadership. And I think what they really tried to do is just push it aside. Because even Trump didn't want to deal with it. He gave it to Mike Pence to do. And then Mike Pence didn't really do anything. So then nothing really happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. It just started to spread. They hoped it would go away. They thought it was going to be a miracle, like you said. And even during the convention, Mike Pence was like, Joe Biden the other night said that it would take a miracle. If we didn't do anything, it would have to take a miracle for the pandemic to go away. And then he said, well, America's built on miracles. The thing is, that's not how life works. You're going to actually have to do the work if you want something to get done. And I think the Trump administration didn't understand that. And I think what they thought is that they were soaring to victory in the 2020 election when when the issue was brought up in, what was it, December probably when they first heard about it?
January, February.
I mean, it popped up in China in like November, December.
Yeah, but it only came to real fruition in around January, February.
February,
I think
yeah, around
I
there.
think it was later February when Trump became first aware of it. But continue.
And, yeah, and I think if it wasn't for COVID-19, they probably would have won the 2020 election because Trump's response to COVID-19 was something that Biden could really attack at, and I think that was a very a valid thing to attack Trump on because of his failed leadership at that time. And I think we probably wouldn't be here today. We probably would have been done probably by now with the pandemic if it wasn't for the leadership shown by the former president. And I also think that schools would have gotten back much sooner if he had already shut everybody down, put a mask mandate in place really early on, back in early March, mid-March-ish. And I think we could have been done by the end of the summer like he hoped. But that didn't happen because of his failed leadership. He just assumed it would go away.
See, the issue is that history will judge someone's decision because, as we know, we cannot see into the future, but we can look back in the past. I think we can't blame it all on the Trump administration for what they did. They saw into the future that there was a pandemic that, as I said earlier, could be as bad as just a common cold or could have been just as bad as the Black Plague, right? So they decided in favor to protect the economy, which turned out to be a bad choice because if you shut everything into lockdown, that can hurt the economy for a while, and could also diminish your reputation if it turns out to be just a common cold. So we
Well,
can't put all the blame on the Trump administration for not knowing how the severity of what they're doing and what the future will look back on them and think. But
well,
I
you were
certainly
saying that.
agree. I certainly agree that they turned kind of a blind eye and didn't really do much. They took the effective option, even though they didn't know which would be the best.
Well, you were
The
saying
least,
that the Trump administration was trying. They were focusing on protecting the economy, and I don't disagree with that. But I don't think that was their main priority. I think they were just trying to make themselves look good, make sure
yeah,
Trump didn't lose any money during this crisis, or any of his fellow comrades in his cabinet. So I think he was just there
yeah,
to protect himself.
yeah.
He didn't want
There
him to
probably
look
is some
bad
truth
by
to
shutting
that.
down the
Yeah,
government.
there really probably is
Yeah,
some truth to
he
that.
didn't. Because let's say he had gone ahead and put a mask mandate, shut everything down, shut the economy down, he would have looked really bad. Of course, later on, people would understand. Yes, he did this for the right thing, which he didn't. But this is just hypothetical. Let's say he had, and the pandemic would have ended earlier, and people would be like, "Look at his leadership. We need to reelect him in 2020." He probably would have won if he had showed leadership
Yeah,
early on in the pandemic. Instead of worrying about his financial gains and losses, and a bit basically about himself.
yeah. I think we can all agree that the Trump administration didn't weigh their odds correctly, and messed up, and Trump paid the price of not winning the 2020 election. I think so.
Yeah.
The next thing we're going to be talking about is an operation started by the Trump presidency, but debatably put into extreme effectiveness during the early Biden administration. Operation Warp Speed was an operation that intended on using the U.S. Army and Federal Reserves to buy a large supply of vaccines in order to quickly vaccinate the population. So it's very interesting, and personally, I think that both sides were smart in their idea of execution. What are your thoughts?
I think, yes, it's good that Trump finally put into operation the Operation Warp Speed. He put it together. It should have been done a lot earlier after he saw what happened in China and in Europe. But I do think overall, if there was no Operation Warp Speed, would we have a good distribution of vaccines? And the answer is probably not. And I do think that the former president, really should have done it earlier. It would have showed leadership, and now he's taking credit for the vaccine
Mm-hmm.
because he put in place of Operation Warp Speed when he really didn't do anything. All because people underneath him did work. He's just taking credit for it, and I think that
Yeah.
it goes into Operation Warp Speed. He didn't really do much with it. He just let other people do the work for him. So it's another way how Trump is just making himself look good. He's not worried about anything else but making himself look good for the 2020 election, which you said he eventually lost.
Yeah. The Operation Warp Speed did look. I'm gonna put a chart up around now. Um, Operation Warp Speed did really start to take an effect after the Biden's inauguration, and especially during his presidency around the mid March, where during mid March, at least 20% of the population was fully vaccinated. As we are recording this podcast, as this in mid March, yeah, around 15% of the population was fully vaccinated. As we're sitting at now, as we're recording, the 46% of the population is fully vaccinated. So there is some definite improvement by the Biden administration, but it is at least we got it done, because without Trump's initiative to put it in place, we'd have to wait a lot longer for the Biden administration to catch up with other nations.
Well, I will say you did say that it was the Biden administration that really kicked off warp speed, and that is true.
Yeah.
And this goes along with Trump making himself look good. His main goal after he lost the 2020 election was trying to overturn the results and take credit for the vaccine. And like I said, this is all to make him look good. And because he
I
knew
certainly
that
agree.
it was going to be Biden that ended the pandemic. Because it's not going to last 4 years, even if Biden lost in 2024. It's not going to last 4 years. He knows Biden's going to get credit for ending the pandemic, for being this leader that ended the pandemic. So he knows that Biden will probably get credit for the vaccine rollout, ending the pandemic altogether. So he really wants to get into that and say, look what I did. I put together Operation Warp Speed. He didn't do much work with it, but he really wants to take credit for it. And I don't really think that's fair on Biden's part, because I think Biden's put a lot more effort into ending the pandemic than Trump ever did. Like, on his first day of office for Biden, he probably put more work than Trump did his entire term on the pandemic.
Yeah. So it's very perspective that if you look at one source, you can certainly say that that source either being Fox News, that you can certainly say that Trump's administration started Operation Warp Speed, which they did, but it was really only Biden that put it into major effect. So, how are we looking on time? We're good. Alright, so this is going to be a bit quicker. So we're going to talk about the individual governor's response to the COVID outbreak, because governors played a big role in the pandemic, and sadly, they also played a big role in pandemic politics as well. But it's kind of we're going to cover this. So, during the pandemic, the Trump administration, as we talked about earlier, they failed to sort of rally up the pandemic and get things organized. They put it on the individual governors to kind of, number one, decide their own mandates based on the guidelines that the White House was initiative and the CDC was initiating. And so it was kind of, sadly, I think, left to politics as right-wingers in more right-wing states decided that it would be a good idea to lift some of the mandates aspect, while more hardline Democrats in more democratic states, in left-leaning states, wanted more of a restriction to end the pandemic earlier, and so it started becoming a political issue, the political issue of the safety of others. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, so I did hear you. You were talking about how the federal government didn't do anything, really. They left it up to the states, as you said. So it was a big part of the governors to get in there and basically protect the people of their state, make sure that they protect themselves from the pandemic. And obviously some governors did better than others. From Trump's point of view, they think Republicans did wonderful, even those Florida, one of the Republican state, Republican governor, blew up in cases, but also you could make the case, well, New York City also blew up in cases, and that's ran by Democrats. But then you also had the argument, well, in Florida, except for a few cities, it's mainly spread out, and there's rural areas, while New York City, at least the city, it's really packed together. So Andrew Cuomo has gotten a lot of pushback, not only because of the scandal he was going through, and of beginning of 2021, and kind of still is now, but also because of his pandemic efforts for New York State. He was seen front runner for the presidential race in 2024 after showing his leadership during 2020's outbreak in New York, and of course after the scandal that's been basically thrown away because he's gotten into problems with sexual assault and, or not sexual assault, just unwanted advances, I think is what they call it. But in general, there's been these governors that just respond to the virus in very different ways. For example, in California, he put a mask mandate and he shut down everything. But then later on, he had a dinner with a bunch of people that he wasn't family with, and now he's getting recalled for that. So there's backlash from the public. And then you also see places like we were talking about before, Florida with Ron DeSantis. He shut down. He didn't even shut down. He was, it left open. The economy was left open, and cases started to rise. And
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think that was a worse response than all the other states we talked about, New York and California. Even though they got a lot of backlash, at least they did their job, shut down everything, so then people wouldn't be out and about spreading the virus because the vaccine wasn't out at that time. And I think they showed more leadership than Ron DeSantis in Florida ever did.
Yeah, I think a good instance of kind of this Republican versus Democrat situation was back in, I think, May. Trump wanted to hold a rally in August in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is our home state here at TTP. And Roy Cooper refused because he believed the pandemic was not over in North Carolina, and he thought Trump was going to be irresponsible. And so it does interfere with, I guess, partisan politics here in the situation. It's like Trump's mad that he doesn't get his rally in Charlotte, and Roy Cooper's mad that Republicans are giving him a hard time. And so it kind of shows the clash between the Republican and Democratic ideologies.
Yeah, like you said, Republicans want the economy to stay open, people to be out and about, even those that will spread the virus further, while Democrat states want to close down the economy. It's going to slow down the economy. However, people will be staying inside, and the spread overall will be less if you have a lockdown. So I think that basically wraps up that section of the episode. And now I want to talk about the effects this had on the 2020 election. And I really think this pandemic is the sole reason we have Joe Biden as our president. I said earlier I think Trump would have easily won his 2020 re-election bid if it hadn't been for the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you look back, every president since George H.W. Bush has had 2 terms. You had Clinton, so from 1993 to 2001. You had George W. Bush. He served from 2001 to 2009. And then Obama from 2009 to 2013. No, sorry, 2009 to 2017. And then now you have Trump. I really think he would have served 8 years if it hadn't been for the pandemic. The economy, for overall, wasn't terrible. And I think, yes, his approval rating was in the negatives. But also, that doesn't normally show much. Obama had a negative approval rating in 2012, and he easily won against Mitt Romney. Mm-hmm. And so did George W. Bush, and he easily won against Kerry. So I really think Trump would have won here. If Trump had showed leadership, like we said before, I do think he probably would have won. Mm-hmm. But the lack of leadership that the American people saw from him, I think it really shined through there. And the American people really saw Trump's true colors and chose, let's not vote for him. I'm either going to vote for the opposition party, which in this case was Joe Biden, or just a third party.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, Republicans rallied even more in this scenario. More Republicans voted for Trump. More people voted for Trump in this election than they did in the 2016 election. So it was really just kind of a clash of ideologies, where Trump tried to attract more hardliner right wingers and same thing with Biden. But Biden went a different road and tried to attract kind of more conservative moderate Democrats. What was I going to say? And so this kind of showed a light to Trump's kind of, the whole pandemic going on, what you said, Andrew, is that without this, Trump kind of wouldn't have gone into this descent of chaos, where he, number one, kind of ignored Black Lives Matter protests. And again, January 6, 2021. A lot of these things may not have happened if the coronavirus didn't exist and Trump went smooth sailing past the 2020 election, right?
Mm-hmm. And you just said that Trump ignored Black Lives Matter protests. That's not true. I'm sorry. He did. He ignored the January 6th riot because it was his people. But the
Yeah.
moment that on Black Lives Matter protests, he activated the National Guard, which he didn't do for the
Yeah.
January 6th riot or uh, um, attempted coup.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that he didn't do anything because of the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah.
Nothing happened because of the Black Lives Matter protest in his eyes.
And I will say, just in general, his attacks on Joe Biden also didn't look very good on him because of all the scandals he had gone through during his presidency. And I think that also, along with the pandemic, really brought him down. I think just the scandals alone that he had during his presidency probably wouldn't have made him lose the election, but along with the pandemic,
Yeah.
really hammered him down.
Yeah, and I think while while Joe Biden was kind of just chilling during the just before the 2020 election, I think, as Trump said, he's locked in his basement. But I think while Joe Biden was chilling, Trump was kind of digging his own graves by holding maskless rallies. And by kind of attacking the media and just these harsh punishments, as you were saying, and not harsh punishments, but just like hard attacks on Joe Biden, and so it was very strategic for just Biden to, number one, not hold any rallies, well, major rallies at least, and just kind of chill during the pandemic and not race Trump to the grave, which I think helped Joe Biden extraordinarily, as he attracted probably more moderates, a lot more minorities, and a lot more conservative Dems.
And you did mention earlier that Trump did get more votes than he got in 2016 and more than Hillary Clinton got. And he did say this is the most votes that any incumbent president has ever gotten in history. And that's true. But the thing is, Biden's thing was that he wanted to get people out to vote because he knew that if everyone in the country voted, which not everyone in the country did vote, but turnout was up significantly to how it was in 2016. But he knew if that a lot of people voted, he knew he was going to win. But in Trump, yes, also a lot of the votes that Biden was saying go out to vote also voted for Trump, and that's a big reason why he had a significantly more votes than he did in 2016, and more than Hillary Clinton did in 2016.
Yeah, I think the thing that Trump also kind of messed his campaign up was him trying to stop early voting. Because all early voting and vote by mail ballots, this kind of screwed him up in reality, as he looked like more tyrannical when he was doing this, even though it was just a COVID-19 precaution. And so when he was like, "Stop the count," it's
Stop
after
the
the
count in
election,
the places
yeah.
he's leading, and
Yeah.
count every vote in the places he's not leading.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the Georgia hand me 11,000 votes. We just need 11,000 votes. And all
Well,
that
that
stuff
didn't
led him to impeachment, making him the only president to be impeached twice in American history.
Yeah, that and the Capitol insurrection.
Oh yeah,
But
well,
also,
I think that was kind of obvious.
Georgia it obviously wouldn't have affected the 2020 election because
Yeah.
the election had already happened at that point. But it really did affect those runoff races in Georgia, making 2 Democrats win there.
Yeah. So
All right. So now we're going to move on to our last segment of the episode. And this is just what's going to happen in our future. How quickly are we going to be able to handle this pandemic? And for the most part, the president has, Dr. Fauci has, the CDC has. It's just getting people out to get vaccinated. And a lot of people that are hesitant are all Trump supporters for the most part. People that believe this big lie of that the vaccine has microchips or something crazy in it from Bill Gates or whatever these crazy conspiracy theories are. And I feel like we need to inform people that no, or almost half of the people are vaccinated now in the country, and nobody's really gotten hurt as far as I'm aware. And
Yeah,
the
I mean-
vaccines are safe.
Yeah, the reflections show people about 55% of the population at this time has received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. And so that kind of reflects a lot of moderate Republicans and a lot of Democrats, because about 50% of the population is Democrats, and plus a lot of moderate Republicans, and there's still people who haven't gotten vaccinated yet because they
In
can't.
terms of registration, it's not half, but there are more Democrats than Republicans in terms of registration.
Yeah, certainly.
So I think that we're about to wrap up this episode. Anything
Yeah,
else you want
so-
to say, Sam?
Yeah, this is just a disclaimer that the pandemic is. I know we don't have that many viewers at the time, but the pandemic is not over at the time of publishing. If you're not fully vaccinated, still wear a mask. And also, for a lot of people I know, fully vaccination comes 2 weeks after either your second dose of a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, or your 2 weeks after your first dose of a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So you are not fully vaccinated after you've got your second dose.
Now, a lot of people don't seem to understand that.
Yeah.
At least at school.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll show you next episode.
Bye.